You ever noticed in, like, I don't know if you, so I did theater. I'm going to tell you why I did that.
He's really mad at us, that's why.
I need to get your attention one more time. So in movies where they have that clap, that big thing that goes, take 20 or 5 million, that basically syncs up the audio with the video. And so you see when you have the video, it spikes. You guys already know this. Okay, great. I'm done. Speaking of the choir.
This is Mel before every TikTok.
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, where did he go? Last time he was hiding behind. Okay, got it. Thank you for the market update. At Uptown Properties, we believe that education is the foundation to a great portfolio, and that's why Chris and AJ created the Westside Investors Network, this group. They also have a podcast. They just dropped their 186th episode. So if you're interested in learning about syndications, the last two they put out, the one before this last one was about flex space, industrial flex space. So, I mean, it's just really interesting, and that was out of Texas. Actually, the guy they interviewed was nationwide. He's based out of Texas. Anyways, it's just fascinating stuff.
Leo,
okay.
what's the name of their podcast?
So Westside Investors Network.
Westside Investors.
If you got a program for the bingo, it's on the back. You can scan the QR and then you can get access to just listen. Yeah. All right, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. But first, a little backstory. So I first met Mel in January at Investor Lab. And if you're not familiar, it's another great event where investors and real estate professionals, they come to network, very similar to this. You hear a guest speaker, just like tonight, and I'm going to shout out Mike Nuss. He does a great job of putting together an awesome event. So afterwards, I went to go say goodbye to a friend, and I found myself being the fourth wheel, standing awkwardly there while he continued his conversation. And then Mel was there, and I was like, well, okay, I'm going to break the fourth wall, and I'm just going to let's start a conversation, even though I'm trying to get out of here. So we got to talking, and I was genuinely floored by Mel's story. Two things stuck to me: uplift the community by banking on your neighbors, keep the money local, and stick it to the banks. Now, obviously, there is a time and place for institutional money, and that's actually one of my favorite things about real estate is that there's so much nuance and there's different tools for different scenarios. So let me give you a little bio of Mel's journey for those of you who are not already familiar. Mel Dorman went from dumpster diving in their 20s to building a multi-dollar real estate portfolio in their 30s, acquiring 34 rental units in just 5 years, using a mix of traditional loans and creative seller financing. A former social worker turned financial activist, Mel is the founder of the Seller Financial Academy, author of Bank on Your Neighbor, and the mind behind TEDx's Editor's Pick talk that reached hundreds of thousands of people hungry for an alternative aside from the corporate grind. So put your hands together and welcome Mel Dorman.
Thank you so much. Excited to be this group. This is the second one that you've done for a while. Like you just restarted this.
We took a hiatus, yes.
That's so cool.
So
Well, I'm honored. Well, I'm excited to share with you today. I'm going to start high level, and then we'll kind of do some Q&A. So I like to start with a love story. I'd like to tell you about a love story. So about 10 years ago, I was at this bar, and I was sipping cocktails, getting to know this 65-year-old guy. Little awkward looking at me, of course. But a few words into our conversation, I realized that he was exactly what I'd been looking for. You see, at the time, I was broke, and he owned real estate. I was ready to invest, and he wanted to retire. And I was gay, and his wife was named Susan. So we were an awkward couple in that bar. But that night, one thing led to another, and I ended up buying his triplex with only $500 out of pocket. Now, before I get into the juicy details of what I said and what we did to get there, I'm gonna take you back in time with me. All right, so I came from a humble beginning. I think 2009, I'm 21 years old. I'm sitting at a dinner table with 7 of my roommates. We're drinking Zinfandel, we're eating filet mignon, And we're celebrating. I mean, we did it. We just graduated into the worst economy in almost 100 years, right? You remember, it was tanked by banks who were handing out loans to pretty much anybody with a pulse, as we saw in these slides. And so instead of full steam ahead into our careers, we were steaming cappuccinos at Starbucks. And yet, night after night, we ate like kings and queens. So you might be wondering, how did we do it? Were we trust fund babies? No. I'll tell you the secret. We got all that delicious food straight out of the dumpster. And before you judge me, I want to hear me out. This was perfectly good food, okay? It was mostly frozen still, and the expiration date was days away. It was excellent. I get it. My parents didn't quite understand either, especially when I told them mid-bite of the meal where it came from. They actually got mad at me. I was like, Mom, can't you see I'm turning debris into charcuterie debris? Oh, but don't worry, this is not about how to dumpster dive your way to riches, but this is just a story I want to share with you to illustrate my first lesson. You see, I learned in that moment that community plus creativity could save us some money, at least on our grocery bill. And this is a lesson I'm going to build on a little later, so if you got a notepad and it's super complicated, you want to write that down. So this is a lesson I'll build on later, but in the meantime, you might be wondering, how can somebody who was dumpster diving for their food even think about getting into real estate? And truthfully, my dad inspired me. Now, my dad was a roofer for 50 years. I mean, he could fix just about anything. Like, for my 16th birthday, we bought this old, beat-up, red 65 Mustang. And I'll never forget, one day when we were working on that car together, Dad forgot the name of his favorite burger spot, which was frightening because nobody forgets about In-N-Out Burger. Am I right? I knew something was wrong. And sure enough, a few weeks later, the doctors told us why. My 67-year-old father had Alzheimer's. Are you kidding me? Dad's our rock, right? He's our breadwinner. My blue-collar, middle-class family, we weren't prepared for that. My parents were construction workers. We lived paycheck to paycheck, like 60% of Americans do. It turns out, as my dad's disease progressed, it was going to cost my family $7,000 a month to take care of him. Joel knows, he works with people like that. And this was a shock. And so, we looked into Social Security, right? He's at the retirement age, surely. It's like $2,000 a month. Wow, 50 years just for that? Okay. And then we asked Medicare, right? They'll help us. No, they don't do memory care. Not until you're about to die. And so suddenly, I started asking questions like, what does it cost to retire in America? I'm 21 years old. And it turns out my family needed $1 million to take care of my dad. And with so many American families struggling like mine, I started to wonder, where is all the money going, right? And you probably already know, billionaires, corporation owners, not a big surprise, right? And at that time, in 2018, the top 3 wealthiest men in our nation had more wealth than half the country combined. Take that in. 3 people have more wealth than half the entire nation. Something's going wrong. And since then, it's only gotten worse. In 2025, the Federal Reserve said that 1/10 of 1%, 1/10 of 1% of our population has 5 times the amount of wealth of half our nation. It is only getting worse. Growing up in America and seeing this gross inequality, I thought that there was only 2 options, right? You either are this capitalist pig who just takes advantage of people and tries to get ahead, or you work hard, you stay broke, or you get to be a decent person. Now, my family's crisis got me thinking, maybe things aren't so binary. I had to find a way to help my family, and I wanted to do it in a way that didn't hurt other people. So, at this point, I'm 27 years old. My dad's disease is progressing. I'm stressing because police found him wandering miles from home, alone. And so my family was running out of options. And at that time, fortunately, I just started my lucrative career as a social worker. So I had to figure out something quick. And like any good millennial would do, I rolled up my sleeves and I Googled it. how to build wealth, which led me to bigger pockets and other places, but through real estate is what I learned. And so I started listening to all the top podcasts and listening to the books on audio, every day, 20 hours a week, just filling my mind. And at work, my social work buddies, they'd tease me. I'd be handwriting my letters to sellers and they would call me Zillow. You see, joke's on them because after a few months of doing that, I found a duplex that even I could afford, off market. And I did the math and I realized if I used the money that I'd saved up working overtime at my job, that I could fix it up and I could sell it for a profit and I could take care of my dad for an entire year. I figured it out. I was so excited. Well, before I could book my ticket home, my sister called me instead. She said my dad had taken a turn for the worst and I was too late. He was dying. Days later, I was at my dad's hospital bedside, holding his hand one last time, realizing that I was too late for him. And, at the time I was just in shock. And then I just felt outraged, right? Worked 50 years of his life, right? Paycheck to paycheck, with nothing to show in the end. And so I did something really radical. I quit my day job as a social worker with $16,000 left because I just fixed up that duplex. $16,000 in my checking account. I committed myself. I said, if hard work didn't work out for my dad, then I wasn't going to go back to work again. I was going to figure this out on my own. You see, my dad's death and life taught me that hard work isn't enough to retire in America anymore. And so I decided I was going to become a real estate entrepreneur. Or go back to dumpster diving, one of the two. Now, I have one little problem, right? I didn't have a job, so how was I supposed to buy more property? No bank was going to give me a loan. This wasn't 2007 anymore. So naturally, the first thing I did as a real estate investor is I spent half of my life savings, $8,000, on a real estate boot camp. But here's the thing. It worked. And I'm going to share it with you now, but don't worry. I'm not going to charge you $8,000. You see, for most people, buying a property feels like a distant dream. And my coaching students, they come to me, they say, I don't have enough for the down payment. Interest rates are too high. I don't qualify for the loan. You see, all of these problems have one thing in common. The banks. This is the big secret. We don't need them. We can buy and sell property on our own. You see, seller financing, as if you guys don't already know, is when a home buyer pays a seller directly, right? No middleman involved. It's like the seller becomes the bank and you make your installment payments to them every month. And it's just two people working together, cutting out the middleman, the banks. And this is what we used to do back before the banks got involved in the 1930s. We just worked directly together. And as Chris mentioned, it was very popular in the 70s and 80s when interest rates were 17, 18%. But somehow we've forgotten. Now, after learning this, I knew that I would have to find the right seller to partner with me. Unemployed, social worker, dumpster diving kind of buyer. So I searched high and low in my community. I sent letters to strangers. I called people I didn't even know, which eventually led me to a bar on a Tuesday night with a guy named Kelly. I was broke, and Kelly owned real estate. I wanted to invest, and he was ready to retire. So you might be wondering, how did I buy his triplex with only $500? Well, because it was an incredible deal for Kelly and his wife, Susan, too. They made hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest, money that just would have went to the banks. And in exchange, I got access to buying property. Well, at first he wanted $75,000 down. And I didn't have that. It was 10%, by the way. It was very reasonable. But I didn't have that. I mean, you know me. I like charcuterie. So quick on my feet, I asked him, what would it cost for you to foreclose on me? And he said $15,000. That's what it cost in Oregon. I said, great. And he's an attorney after all, he understood. I said, well, if it's only $15,000, why don't we make that the down payment? If I don't pay you, you can use my own money to foreclose on me. And he agreed. But you know me. I didn't have $15,000 either. So he let me raise money with friends and family. Actually, just some friends of mine. And he let me do a delay in the first payment because 2 of the units were vacant. So by the time I owed my first payment, I had recouped $6,500 of the $7,000 that I had to put into it, which meant I was only $500 out of pocket by the time I owed my first payment. No bank would do that for me. Seller financing taught me, actually, this all led me to update my prior calculation. I learned that community plus creativity plus equity means a whole lot of money for both of us. And using this equation, I went out into my community and I co-created more of these types of win-win partnerships. I bought folks' properties, I rented them out, and then we just split the profits. And in 5 years from quitting my day job as a social worker, I had built 6-figure financial freedom for myself, while also helping a handful of my neighbors retire. Well, the ones that were willing to work with a dumpster diving social worker like me. Seller financing keeps wealth in our communities. It's like a garden. In order to grow good quality food, we need to have good soil, right? We need to have nutrients in our communities. And the same is true financially. In order to thrive, we need to keep money in our local economy. And the same is true, if you think about the nutrients that leaves our communities when we get a bank loan, right? Hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on each month. All of that wealth is leaving our communities, going to Wall Street, to billionaires. But seller financing, when we lend to one another directly, we get to keep that wealth in our communities. We keep it circulating and generative. So if you're wondering how to get started, if you haven't already, I want you to ask a different question instead. Not how, but who. Who do you know in your life who has equity? Is it a neighbor down the street? Is it a friend, a family member? Who do you know who is looking to downsize and retire? Who do you know who believes in community? Most of the time when we're thinking about investing, we're thinking about money capital, right? It takes money to make money. But in seller financing, what greases the wheels is social capital, not money capital. It's relationships. And all you really need is 2 willing people. One who has equity to lend in their property, and one who is trustworthy enough to borrow it. So you look for people who are rental property owners, people who are looking to downsize, retire. Literally anybody can become a lender as long as they have equity. So, how do you find a neighbor that you can bank on? Well, it's actually a lot like dating. That's why I told that little story. Except for you don't have to swipe on a pic of somebody holding up a fish. It's a lot better. But if you want to find somebody to partner with, first you got to become your best self. You got to demonstrate responsibility. You have to develop a good reputation, capacity. And of course you're going to have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince or princess. But who knows, you might already know them. And don't be surprised if you fall in love with the people you meet along the way. I started my speech today saying that I had a love story to share. And well, Kelly and his wife Susan and I became dear friends after I bought their property. There's a picture of us there. I'll never forget, as I was writing my book, Bank on Your Neighbor there, which, by the way, free copies if anybody wants them. I'll never forget when we were walking to our car that night, I showed them the manuscript, I got their feedback, and Kelly turned to me and said something. He said, now I would have known 2 famous authors. And he said it with such certainty that it brought me to tears. But let's be real. Kelly and Susan lent me $700,000. Okay, back when we were only strangers. All right? Why would they trust me over the banks? Well, besides the $242,000 I will have paid them in interest, and the fact that they could always take the property back if I ever stopped paying them, there's one more reason. Here's why. Kelly told me this story when he was a little boy. His parents invited a friend over for the holidays. Now, she was a flight attendant by trade, but she really wanted to become an author. And she was too broke to fly home. So she spent the holiday with them. Now, Christmas morning, the little boys were opening up all their toys, and it seemed like there were going to be no gifts left for their guest. And just in that moment, Kelly's mom said, "Don't worry, dear. We haven't forgotten you." And sure enough, there was one little envelope under the tree, and she walked over, she opened it up, and her eyes grew wide, and it read, "You have 1 year off from your job to write whatever you please. Merry Christmas. A dream come true." You see, the family had made enough money that year. They could afford to support her. And more importantly, they understood the value of investing in people. And one of those little boys grew up to be Kelly. And that's why he invested in me. And this is the love story I wanted to share with all of you. And while I've been on this stage sharing my story, I've also been sharing our story. The story of the American people. We all survived the banks collapsing. And many of us struggle to buy a home. And most of us are afraid of running out of money as we get old. But the truth is, we could help each other. So, people say, be the change you want to see in the world, right? But I say, why should we settle for change when we could be making dollars financing each other? Because if enough of us believed that we could bank on our neighbor, then we would change the world together. Speaking of changing the world, that flight attendant at Christmas, her name was Harper Lee, and she wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. Who here has seen me do my TEDx talk before? Okay. Well, now you all can raise your hand, because I just did my TED talk. I am an incredibly busy founder right now, building the Seller Finance Academy, of which I have several students in this room. And so my coach said, do what you know. Do what you know. And then just do Q&A, because honestly, that's where you're going to get the most out of me, is the questions you have. And so I have a few slides we can go through, but I'd rather just open this up right now.